Hello, and thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Mario D'Souza, and I'm a writer and curator based between New Delhi, Goa, and Fort Kochi in India. I was on the curatorial team for the fifth edition of the Kochi Maziris Biennial, and I'm currently director of programs at the Kochi Biennale Foundation. I'm also resident curator at HH Art Spaces in Goa. Uh, we're hosting this conversation today with artist Sahil Naik on the occasion of our second collaboration with TBA 21's stage platform. Um, and before we speak to Sahil, I would like to just place the work that we commissioned as part of the first collaboration between our two institutions. Uh, Neti by Pranay Datta is based on the Sundarbans, a really fragile ecosystem shared between India and Bangladesh that is fast sinking, as well as is being hit by major ecological degradation caused by various forms of mineral mapping, mining, but also nature's wrath. I wanted to place this work before, and if you haven't had the chance, you should definitely be seeing it on the stage platform. Also, because we return to the idea and the site and context of the Sundarbans in the work of Sahil Naik, which is titled Karkadann of Land and the Dark Seas. The work is a video essay that uses the rhino as a sort of a time traveling device, moving through various times and spaces and sites across history. Um, we begin, of course, with the unfortunate fire that gutted the Natural History Museum here in New Delhi in 2017, destroying almost the entire collection. And yeah, Sahil uses the rhino that was in the foyer of the museum as a sort of a starting point to take these multiple journeys across time. And yes, I would like to invite Sahil to firstly introduce himself and to tell us a little bit about his practice. I've had the opportunity of working with Sahil through Khoj and now through Kochi. And yeah, we're really looking forward to share this work with you.
My name is Sahil Naik, and I'm an artist based in Goa. My work is mostly interested in architecture, landscapes, and within that, the natural history, also the ocean as a form of divining new worlds. So for the last few years, I've been working on this multi-part research, which is titled Monuments, Mausoleums, Memorials, and Modernism, which kind of studies the post-independence nation-building projects in South Asia. It also looks at architecture. It looks at architecture, public spaces, ecology, and landscapes. So the video essay also comes from this research, particularly from the unfortunate incident of fire in the Natural History Museum in New Delhi.
Thank you so much, Sahil. I wanted to position two things that we could sort of also anchor this conversation in. The first is, of course, the state of Goa, which is where you practice out of, and its unique position in the Indian Ocean world. Also, Goa seems to be a sort of a recurring protagonist in your work. It seems to somehow be a site whose history you return to very often within this larger history that you're sort of navigating within the Manasa region. And the second thing is, of course, the format of the museum, which is something that you've come to challenge very consistently over the past few years. And I remember, like, within our many conversations, you particularly spoke about how it is so important to recalibrate what a museum means, particularly in today's times, especially in a place like India, where we're seeing that there is a large-scale erasure of certain histories, but also with the current government that is trying to rewrite the narrative, and in many ways, the foundational histories of this country, what sort of a role a truly public institution like a museum could play, but also the many compromises that previous governments have laid onto this format. And we very briefly touched upon the Natural History Museum, which also was inaugurated and was built with the imagination of Indira Gandhi, somebody who was also responsible for the Indian emergency. But also that museum was born out of this impetus of her seeing what other countries had to offer from her many travels. So it was a template that she was trying to directly, in many ways, employ onto India. So this something in many ways it could have been a very unique opportunity for this country to showcase its many its natural history wealth, but it ends up becoming a shell of something that already existed in the West. And I think that this is also a critique that we've spoken about in our many conversations. But just wanted to come back to these two things, these two sort of like protagonists that sometimes come to the fore, but are sometimes just the background of these many conversations that you're anchoring in this work. The site of Goa and the format of the museum.
So I've spent a lot of time around museums. For example, the Goa State Museum was very close to the Goa College of Art where I was doing my bachelor's, and the Baroda Museum was right in front of the Fine Arts faculty in Baroda. Also, I remember in 2016, I was a part of a residency in Khoj, Delhi. During that time, I used to visit the Natural History Museum a lot. So basically, my phone was filled with photographs of all the museum objects, specimens, dioramas, models. And as we look back now, we have already lost the Natural History Museum to the fire, and the Goa State Museum was demolished and never rebuilt. So when all of this happened, I started looking at all the photographs, drawings, and all the archives more closely, and which is when I also started traveling to other states and all the smaller regional museums, just to like see all the sister specimens and objects, and which is when all the connections began to emerge, like all the smaller histories, oral histories, rumors, which essentially became an antidote to the rigidity of the museum. So coming back to your first question, I was born and raised in Goa, and I still continue to work here. And in many ways, I believe my first understanding of art and culture comes from this many forest festivals that we have in our state. Also, the stories, which are like an important part of our history, remain very strong than what the state wants us to believe. So these are like very personal and people's history. If we look at Goa on a global scale, uh, it was ruled by Mauryans, Kadambas, Delhi Sultanate before the Portuguese arrived. We can also see traces of prehistory in the form of rock carvings in southern part of Goa. Also, Goa was one of the very active ports during the Silk Route.
Let us also talk about Karkadann, and I think that this is again a very interesting sort of an entity to talk about because you also speak about the Killin and the giraffe that went to China, for example, as a gift to the Ming Emperor, who believed that the giraffe was a Killin, and just all these like mythical creatures in and out of in and around the Silk Route, rather. Um, in fact, in one of the earliest maps of the world by Matteo Ricci, we see a we see this map which is like almost against Christianity in so many forms because it puts all these like mythical, mystical creatures of land and sea onto the map, things that the Bible and the church did not believe in. But Karkadan is very interesting, particularly because it is said to have roamed the grassy plains of Persia and India. Uh, and we know that the rhinoceros toys that we will also speak about were found as in excavations of the Harappan civilization. And yeah, so along with the rock cut engravings, it would also be really interesting to place the Karkadan as a starting point. And you call the Karkadan in many ways like the first rhino.
Karkadann for me is the oldest rhino to be written about. It's mythical, so everybody draws and imagines it differently. Some see it as a unicorn, others see it as a rhino. So it became a very fascinating starting point. We can also find evidences in the form of drawings and toys, which claim that rhinos once roamed Sindh and Afghanistan. So it became a very natural starting point. I'm also grateful to the Baroda Museum, which is a formal royal museum, because they allowed me to study replicas of Harappan rhinos and seals.
Let's talk about the Gainda, possibly the most famous rhinoceros in Europe, thanks to Durer's inaccurate drawing, and also Clara, two of the many protagonists in your work.
Uh, Actually, rhinos are not very well known in Goa. The West, of course, knows it because of Durer, and also again, it's a rhino from Cambay in Gujarat, which was given as a diplomatic gift to the or a compensation for not allowing or granting permissions for the Portuguese. I have always thought about rhinos in many ways, but it never hit me until I visited the Fort Aguada jail, which was also a Portuguese time prison. So all the ships that used to come in or leave out of the state would stop here to collect water. So inside the jail premises, there's this chapel dedicated to Our Lady of Good Voyage, and inside the chapel there's this mural of Saint Sebastian, which was probably painted by an inmate. And on the foot of the mural was a rhino. So after this, I read about a gainda to find that it was also taxidermized in some form after it was drowned in the ocean on its way to the Pope. And then there was this instant connection between these two animals across centuries. The one in the foyer of the Natural History Museum and one aboard the doomed ship.
Since we're returning to all these various entities that form this work, and in many ways are help us situate these many complex, big and small histories and how they enmesh. I think it would also be pertinent to speak about architectural modernism, and particularly here in South Asia. I mean, concrete becomes the material for post-independence nation building, and um, the first public spaces, civic spaces, housing, as well as like government lobbies and blocks are all sort of thought and cast in concrete. Nehru, of course, goes on to invite now celebrated architects from the West, and they, along with their proteges, as well as a bunch of Indian architects that studied abroad, sort of lay out this template for the land, like thinking about monuments and cities and parks and universities. So yeah, and I think this conversation is all the more urgent today when we're seeing that the right wing, in its bid to sort of rewrite the history, or rather write over the existing history of this country, is consistently attacking these spaces that were truly secular in many ways in their intention, and were meant to bring people together. They were congregational spaces. They were spaces of labor and work and bureaucracy and imagination of what this country and its time were going to be. And yeah, within the work, we have two of these structures. One, of course, is the Natural History Museum, which was housed in the Fiki building on Tansian Marg. And the second is the iconic Hall of Nations by Raj Rewal, built with structural engineer Mahendra Raj, um, which was sadly demolished overnight, but should have truly been saved as heritage of. It was a marker of what this country wanted to move forward and be like. It was an exhibition space to host fairs, and was truly public in that sense. So yeah, I thought we could quickly just like touch over these ideas and architectural modernism and modernist structures that are consistently being demolished, erased, or refurbished by the current government.
Concrete, sand, and metal became like the main material for nation building because it was very cheap. It was also something that we inherited from our relationship with the Soviet bloc and also post war architecture. Raj Reva's Hall of Nations was a trade fair structure. And while studying the structure, I came across different terms such as triangular, pyramidal, but someone once called it a horn, and I couldn't unsee it. The second building was the Natural History Museum. After the fire, the building was considered to be structurally unsafe. So both these buildings were demolished overnight. The Hall of Nations was a heritage structure and should have been saved, but the law failed it.
And as a final thought to leave the audiences with, I wanted to return to the mangrove and the ocean as two final prompts that I thought we could return to, since they are both, again, recurring ideas and entities within the work itself. The mangrove, of course, is deeply sacred and very, very important, both culturally and ecologically, to the state of Goa. It appears across folklore, but also is something that people have tended to and have deeply cared for over the centuries. In fact, the mangroves have in many ways been resilient and have upheld this deeply fragile ecosystem of the small coastal state. And then, of course, we have the ocean, which is considered to be, in many ways, a giver, the mother, like the nurturer. And again, something that binds all these diverse islands and communities and stories together. So I felt it would be interesting to come back to these two as both symbols of hope, but also something that is so deeply a part of the fabric and identity of the state and its people.
Mangroves are the keepers of our land and the sacred refuge. We call them kandas or the floating forest. They also appear across various stories which we have inherited from our ancestors. Like as a child, I was told that our ancestor came from the east, which is the same walk which the rhino took around the region. So here immediately I could place something which was very personal into the larger narrative of the rhino. And then there is the ocean, which gave us fish, nourishment, and the five rivers. But it also brought us storms, colonizers, and diseases, fruits that became a part of us, and plants that destroyed our lands.
Thank you so much, Sahil, for this very generous conversation and for this work that we're so happy to have been able to co-commission with TBA 21 for the stage platform. It has truly, truly been an enriching, nourishing exercise to share these stories and talk about these many histories and learn so much, in fact, from all these many worlds that you bring together. And yeah, we look forward to the next part of the essay. Thank you so much.